1 Samuel 23. And we're going to be talking about three emotions, three situations that control us a lot of time: fear, danger, and conflict. Fear, danger, and conflict will always produce a response in our lives. The fear of death, the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of the dark produces so many responses from young to old. The fear of failure as a husband, the fear of failing as a wife, the fear of failing as a parent, the fear of failing as a follower of Christ. Dangers also produce so many reactions. They come from so many sources. The danger of losing a job, you need to pay the bills. Can we just say maybe the danger of the current financial situation? That at the end of the month, you look at how much you spent on groceries and you said, I didn't have that much money to spend on groceries this month. There's danger when we drive, danger when you do simple things like going camping. There's dangers when you take a risk. There's dangers when you make a choice. And we're surrounded by conflict. There's no less conflict than there are fears and dangers. We have conflict with other people, with our friends, our family, our enemies. You have conflict with yourself. We have conflict with God. We are surrounded by fears, dangers, and conflicts. And every time we encounter one of those, we are forced to respond to them. And I'd be willing to bet that our response to fear, danger, and conflict would show what is branded on our hearts. I grew up helping my grandpa brand his cattle every year for about a dozen years with a large crew of people. And these brands on cattle in this specific situation, but they go on other animals too, they show the ownership of animals. You can look at an animal and you can see the brand and you say, I know who owns that animal. When the branding on your heart is revealed, what would be seen as the owner? Would it be pride? When you encounter fear, danger, and conflict, and people see your heart, do they see anger? Do they see the desire to control every situation possible? Or when you encounter fear, danger, and conflict, do you respond by letting go? Saying, God, I trust you in the midst of this fear. God, I value prayer in the midst of this danger. God, I desire to do what is right. Do you respond with a heart of integrity? In 1 Samuel, we've seen so many responses to fear, to danger, and conflict. The most common, David and Goliath. Israel, the entire army of Israel and their king Saul responded to the giant Goliath with cowardice, preservation of self, and forfeiting their loyalty to their Creator and their King. And David responded to this fear with trust in God, with prayer, and a desire to do what was right. David responded to Goliath with a heart of integrity. This situation, when David slew Goliath, it led to David's entire life changing. He became best friends with Jonathan, the son of King Saul. He became a commander in the army of Israel. Jonathan gave him his armor, his weapons. David became the son-in-law to King Saul, marrying Saul's daughter. And eventually, David became the source of Saul's fear. Last week, Ben showed us how Saul chose to react to fear. His reaction to fear was anger, was a desire to kill David, and then eventually his desire to control the situation, to say, I am going to make this happen the way I want it, even led Saul to attempting to kill his own son, Jonathan. David and Saul had different brands on their heart. Their hearts were owned by different people. David's heart of integrity was owned by God. And Saul's heart of pride and anger was owned by himself. David responded to the threat on his life by fleeing. He became a fugitive in the political eyes of Israel, and he fled Gibeah, Saul's hometown. We have a map here with it's a pretty detailed map that shows us David's flight. He started at point 1 at Gibeah, and he went through Jerusalem, and eventually to the left, and came back down to a town called Keilah. At this point, David had over 400 soldiers with him, whether out of loyalty to David, hatred to Saul, or simply if they were viewed as criminals in the eyes of Israel. David is with 400 men. One of the towns they would go through in their flight from Saul, terrified of Saul, was the town of Nob. And this town, it's special. It's a town for the priests. It's a town for the people who assist in and facilitate the worship of God. And this town helps David, but they don't know that David is a rebel in the eyes of Saul. They give David the sword of Goliath. They give him bread for him and his soldiers. And David continues fleeing. Eventually, Saul would come upon this town and he would say, "Have you seen David?" And they said, "Yeah, we just saw David. We know he's a commander in your armies, and so we helped him." And Saul said, "You did what?" We helped David. We know he's one of your commanders. He's your son-in-law. He's best friends with your son, Jonathan. And Saul said, "He is a rebel in my eyes." And for helping David, the entire town is slaughtered. From the oxen and the sheep and the cattle and the donkeys, to the men, to the women, to the children. And the Bible takes a special mention to even say not just the children, but the infants. I think we're starting to see where Saul's heart is. We're starting to see that Saul does not have a heart of integrity. And in 1 Samuel 23, on the heels of this massacre, we find David and his men still on the run, approaching the city of Keilah. Now they told David in verse 1, "Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors." Therefore David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" And the Lord said to David, "Go and attack the Philistines. Save Keilah." But David's men said to him, "Behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines?" Then David inquired of the Lord again. And the Lord answered him, "Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand." And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines and brought away their livestock and struck them with a great blow. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. David and his men are 20 to 25 miles from Jerusalem at this point by the footpath David took. And then they come upon this town, Keilah, and they find out the enemies of Israel, the enemies of Saul, are attacking this town. They strategically picked the spot to raid. The Philistines said, "We are going to attack the threshing floors." It's where all the grain was processed or harvested and processed. It was a stockpile. It was the place to attack if you wanted an easy target with lots of loot. And the Philistines attack, and David and his men are scared. And I'd say rightfully so. Who is this town owned by? It's owned by Israel, ruled by Saul. David and his men are going to choose to protect a town belonging to the person trying to kill them. On one side, David and his men are going to face the Philistines, and behind them is a town belonging to the man that's hunting them down. David and his men have hearts of integrity. David and his men respond to this fear with prayer. David doesn't respond with, guys, I have this plan. I know there's only 400 of us. We're probably going to lose, but I have this strategic plan. He says, I'm going to go pray. David shows all of his men as a leader what it means to have a heart of integrity, to face fears with prayer. Eventually, David and his men, they would obey God. They would trust God when they were fearful. And they would, in fact, strategically attack the Philistines. They wouldn't go and attack them head on. They were a smaller force. David and his men chose to attack the livestock of the Philistines. They took away their transportation. They immobilized the Philistines. And God delivered the Philistines into David's hand. David responded to fear with trust and prayer. David, with a heart of integrity, chose to follow God. Saul, with a heart of selfish pride, was following himself. Saul should have been there. Saul should have been there. That was his job. He was king of Israel. But Saul was so wrapped up in himself. He was holding so tightly to the situation, saying, I will make this happen how I want it to, that David, with the heart of integrity, had to do the job of king while he was on the run as a fugitive. On the heels of this battle ending, God delivering the Philistines into the hand of David and his men, a single man arrived, out of breath. You can see the tears that were streaming down his face and where the dirt has been washed away by the tears. On this man's face, you see one emotion, and it's pure grief. Verse 6. When Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, had fled to David to Keilah, he had come down with an ephod in his hand. Now it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah, and Saul said, God has given him into my hand. For he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. And Saul summoned all the people to go to war, to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. In verse 6, a new character is introduced, Abiathar. And to discover who he is, we're going to go back to chapter 22, prior to the city of Keilah, chapter 22, verse 18. Then the king, being Saul, said to Doeg, one of his servants, Saul said to one of his servants, you turn and strike the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priests, and he killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. And Nob, the city of the priests, he put to the sword both man and woman, child and infant. Ox, donkey, and sheep he put to the sword. We're starting to see where Saul's heart is. This was the city that helped David and Saul in verse 16 and 17. He actually tells his Israelite men, you need to go kill these people. And his Israelite men said, Saul, these are men and people of God. And so Saul turns to a foreigner that has no respect for the God of the Bible and says, you go kill this town. And this foreigner says, gladly. Can you imagine the fear of Abiathar? He finds David and his men as he's still remembering the screams of his family as they were killed. Abiathar found David and his men. And David and his men, for protecting a town belonging to the king trying to kill him, kill them, they're rewarded not with gold, not with praise, not with love. David and his men, for standing in the line of fire, are rewarded with traitorous betrayal. Someone that saw the entire battle happen goes and finds Saul, and they said, "We know where David is. He actually just saved a town belonging to you." And Saul's response was to besiege his own town. He is so excited to kill David. He says, "I'll wipe out my entire town if it means I get this one man." Saul has a heart of pride, a heart of self-preservation, a heart of, I am going to control the situation. David and his men have hearts of integrity. And while someone reported David's location to Saul, David also had loyalists of his own. A man came and told David, "Saul has found you." Someone told him what happened, that you saved his city, and they're on their way to come and kill you. In verse 9, David knew that Saul was plotting harm against him. And he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ephod here." Then David said, "O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has surely heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah, to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, the God of Israel, please tell your servant." And the Lord said, "He will come down." Then David said, "Will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul?" And the Lord said, "They will surrender you." David hears of this betrayal, that Saul was coming to destroy him. And his response was to go to Abiathar, to get the ephod. And the ephod, it was a priestly garment. It wasn't just a piece of clothing that Abiathar brought. It would go over their shoulders. This was a garment that God said, if you are going to serve in the tabernacle, if you are going to assist in the worship of Yahweh and the creator of the universe, this is something you need to wear. It is holy. It is set apart. David knows this. And it's a small detail for us. But in the minds of Hebrew readers, they see David choosing, now that he has an ephod, to either have Abiathar wear it or he himself wears it. David, when he's encountering danger, he responds with a desire to do what is right. David has a heart of integrity to do what is right. And there's a scholar, his name is James Smith, and he put it this way that I really think explains the differences of Saul and David. The text stresses the contrast between the vindictive and vengeful intentions of Saul and David's unselfish, patriotic, and divinely sanctioned military efforts. Facing this conflict, David goes before God in prayer. He surrenders his prayers, his fears and concerns to God. And did you catch the two titles he used when he was praying? He said, "O Lord, the God of Israel, I am your servant." David said, "God, you are above me. I am beneath you." In the fear of the Philistines and of Saul, David trusted God. In danger of battle, in danger of Saul hunting him down, David desired to do what was right and obeyed God. In conflict, David valued prayer and brought the conflict of a vengeful king before God. David was given his answer. Saul would come down and destroy him. The men of the city would surrender David to Saul. So David and his men leave. In verse 13 and 14, David and his men leave the city. And David and his men, who were about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the expedition. And David remained in the strongholds in the wilderness, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph, and Saul sought him every day. But God did not give him into his hand. When facing danger and fear and conflict, two words bring a lot of hope throughout the Bible: but God. David and his men, they've surged from 400 to 600 men. David is gaining loyalty among the people. They leave, they go 10 miles to the southeast, seeking refuge in the natural landscape formations. They know that Saul would destroy them, but they also know that Saul can't keep up with them. Organized armies, massive troop movements need clear, easy ground to walk on. David and his band of 600 militia can go through the hill country, through the natural rocky formations, and lose Saul. And they escape. Saul initially is forced to choose or to cease the pursuit. He doesn't quit, but he says, we lost David and Keilah, we need to regroup, and Saul continues hunting David, and Saul never finds David. But one person does. There's one person that finds David as he's in the wilderness. There's one person that finds David when he's surrounded by fear and danger and conflict. In verse 15, we learn who that person is. David saw that Saul had come out to seek his life. David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh. And Jonathan, Saul's son, rose and went to David at Horesh and strengthened his hand. And he said to him, "Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Saul my father also knows this." And the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David remained at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. One person found David. Jonathan, his best friend, the son of King Saul, who's hunting David. This one friend found David, Jonathan. Jonathan, we already mentioned, had given David armor and weapons. Jonathan had risked his life to save David. David and Jonathan's friendship is so tightly woven. Jonathan is almost chosen, if not has chosen, to place his friendship with David over his relationship with his vengeful and vindictive father. He strengthened David, maybe with supplies, but the Bible doesn't say Jonathan brought supplies to David. It says Jonathan and David made a covenant. These two leaders, these two men with hearts of integrity in the wilderness, they bonded over their heart of integrity, their desire to do what is right. Their desire to respond to fear, danger, and conflict was to maintain a heart of integrity. And then they break the status quo. Jonathan says, "David, I know Yahweh has chosen to make you king of Israel. And I support that." He says, "David, I will choose to step down as king." Jonathan would have been king after Saul. But Jonathan shows a perfect heart of integrity and says, "David, you will be king." And the response is just as beautiful. David and Jonathan agree, "Jonathan, you will be my second in command." The normal response for David, if he became king, was to kill all the descendants of King Saul. To keep rebellion from happening, David should have killed all of Saul's descendants. But David and Jonathan's hearts of integrity, they go past what the standard is, what the status quo is. And does this not say something about God's design for us? God's design for friendship, for integrity. Jonathan was willing to risk his own life. Jonathan was willing to enter into David's fears, dangers, and conflicts so he could be with his friend. Next time you think someone in your life is in the wilderness, the next time you think someone in your life is facing fear, is facing danger, is facing conflict, why don't you go be with them? And if you're David, why don't you accept that help? This passage is wrought with so many details. This friendship between Jonathan and David, and I'm going to skip to a little bit of the end. This covenant isn't kept. Before David takes the throne as king, Jonathan would die in battle prior to Saul's death. And I can see and feel the heartbreak David had. He's preparing to be king someday. And as he's preparing to take the throne, he thinks back to his friend Jonathan and this moment in the wilderness. He says, Jonathan should have been here. I know Jonathan had a heart of integrity. He should have been here. This passage is filled with the strategic details as David and his men attack the Philistines by immobilizing them. It's wrought with sadness and grief as Abiathar runs to David, knowing that his family was just massacred. And it's a perfect example of what followers of God do when they're facing dangers and conflicts and fears. They meet each other in the wilderness. They don't stay alone. David trusted God when he was fearful. David desired to do what was right when he was in danger. David valued prayer when facing conflict. David and Jonathan had hearts of integrity. So I ask again, how do you respond to fears, to dangers, to conflicts? God valued David and Jonathan's heart. Do you respond with trying to control the situation like Saul did? Did you notice when Saul was told where David was, he didn't pray? He made a false assumption. He said, "Oh, God has delivered David into my hands." Saul made this assumption. Saul let what he knew to be true be masked by his pride and his selfishness and his anger. In chapter 18 of 1 Samuel, Saul said, "I know God is with David." Saul is hunting a man that he knows God is with. Saul's logic is completely masked with pride and anger. That never happens to us, does it? We know what we should do. We know we should forgive that person. We know we should love someone. We know we should stand on truth. We know we should reconcile a relationship. But instead, we mask all of that, all of what we know, with our pride, with our anger, with our selfishness. In your marriage, can you respond to fear, to danger, and conflict with trust? Can you respond to those things in your marriage with your spouse with a desire to do what is right? Can you respond with prayer? Can you respond with a heart of integrity? When facing fear, the fear of death, whether our own or someone else's, can we respond with trust? In our white knuckles that we've been grasping on to what we think is reality, can Can we just let that go? And say, God, I trust you. When we face financial danger, can we respond with a desire to do what is right? When conflict surrounds us, can we respond with prayer? When facing fear, dangers, and conflicts, can we respond with hearts of integrity? In the midst of searching for a lead pastor, can we respond with trust? Can we respond with a heart of integrity? As a church, we're either going to try to control the situation and we're going to say, I've got this, God. I've got it all covered. Or we're going to let it go. And like David, we're going to obey. We're going to follow God. We're going to work hard. And we're going to say, God, the rest is up to you. Can we respond with a heart of integrity? I know there's fear, there's danger, there's conflict with not having a lead pastor. He's not going to fix it all. He's one person. In the midst of fear, danger, and conflict as a church, can we respond with a heart of integrity? God values hearts of integrity. Do we have hearts that God values? Let's pray. God, we thank you that you listen to us. God, we thank you that you've given us this example in your word of your word taking so careful detail to history, God, while also revealing your values and your heart. God, help us to follow the example of David and Jonathan, to respond to every fear and danger and conflict in our lives with trust in you, with prayer, with a heart of integrity, a desire to do what is right, regardless of who knows that we did what was right. God, can we respond like Jonathan and be with each other in the wilderness? And can we respond like David and accept the help? God, help us to have a heart that you value. Amen.